The first sign was silence. Every satellite above Earth went dark at 6:42 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on a Tuesday in October. No warning, no static, just silence, the kind that precedes something enormous and irreversible. Commander Yara Singh was drinking her second coffee at the Joint Space Monitoring Center in Geneva when every screen in the building turned red simultaneously. She put the mug down slowly, as if sudden movement might make things worse. "Tell me those are glitches," she said. Nobody answered, because nobody could lie that well. Three objects had emerged from a spatial fold roughly 40,000 kilometers above the Pacific. They were not asteroids. Asteroids did not have running lights. Asteroids did not hold perfect equilateral formation. And asteroids most certainly did not broadcast on 17 frequencies simultaneously in a language no human being had ever heard, though the tone of it, the flat authority of it, needed no translation. The Cathari dreadnoughts hung in orbit like three iron moons, each one longer than Manhattan, bristling with weapon arrays that glowed a deep, contemptuous violet. Inside them, crews of gray-skinned, four-armed beings went about their tasks with the bored efficiency of professionals who had done this before, many times before, to many worlds before. Their commander, Warlord Vithos, reviewed Earth's file on a datapad while his weapons officer awaited the order. The file was thin, embarrassingly thin. A pre-FTL civilization, barely a century into spaceflight, still burning fossil fuels in significant quantities as recently as 40 years ago, fractured into hundreds of competing political units, spent much of its recorded history killing itself. Vithos tossed the datapad aside. "Transmit the submission demand," he said, "then begin." The first strike hit Sydney, then Cairo, then Sao Paulo, then Mumbai, 17 cities in 6 hours, not destroyed to ruin, but hit precisely, surgically, the way you swat a fly to stun it rather than kill it. The Cathari did not want to damage the infrastructure too badly. The mines and farms and processing plants would be useful once the locals were pacified. Humanity's orbital defense platforms returned fire. It was, to the Cathari gunnery crews, mildly amusing. The human weapons were a century behind. The platforms died one by one, spinning away in silent, flaming arcs. Vithos waited for the surrender transmission. It did not come. He waited another hour. His communications officer checked the frequencies. Nothing. No white flag signal. No emergency broadcast from whatever passed for a world government. No desperate plea for terms. Just silence again. He frowned. That was unusual. Every species submitted by now. Some took 3 strikes, some took 5. None had ever simply said nothing. "Send the demand again," he ordered. Deep beneath the Andes, in a bunker that officially did not exist, the leaders of 47 nations received the second transmission. A translator AI rendered it into English in real time. The assembled heads of state listened. Some wept. Some stared at the table. One, the elderly prime minister of a small island nation, slowly straightened in his chair, looked around the room, and said what everyone was already thinking. "They expect us to beg." The room was quiet for a long moment. "Then let's make sure," said the President of the reconstituted United States, her voice completely steady, "that we absolutely do not." Nobody slept that night. Not in the bunker. Not anywhere on Earth. 8 billion people looked up at their burning sky, and somewhere deep in the marrow of the species, in whatever ancient, stubborn, furious place humans keep the part of themselves that refuses, something woke up. It had been sleeping for a long time. It was not happy about being disturbed. The Cathari ground forces landed on the 3rd day, expecting corpses and compliance. They found neither. The first dropship set down outside the ruins of what had been Johannesburg. The soldiers, tall, four-armed, encased in armor that could stop a tank round fanned out through the rubble with practiced precision. Their scanners showed human life signs scattered throughout the city's substructure. Survivors in basements and tunnels, exactly as expected. They'd round them up, process them, establish the first labor coordination center, and move on to the next city by nightfall. The ambush hit them 11 minutes later. It wasn't sophisticated. Humans with repurposed mining charges, triggered remotely from 3 blocks away, collapsing a road junction and separating the forward squad from the rest of the unit. Then humans, not soldiers, not in any uniform, just people, poured out of buildings with weapons that had no business being as lethal as they were. A mechanic had modified a hydraulic drill into something that punched through Cathari armor at close range. A chemistry teacher had produced something that reacted catastrophically with the compound in Cathari fuel cells. The forward squad was gone in 4 minutes. The Cathari commander reviewed the footage in his command vehicle, jaw working silently. These were not soldiers. The scanner data confirmed it. A civilian, a teacher, a mechanic, untrained, unequipped, fighting anyway. How? He asked his intelligence officer. She had no answer. Across what remained of the planet's connected infrastructure, underground cables, repurposed shortwave radios, even a network of human runners moving between cities on foot, information was flowing. Someone in the ruins of Berlin had discovered that Cathari comm systems operated on a rotating frequency band and figured out the rotation algorithm in 48 hours by listening carefully and writing patterns in a notebook by candlelight. That information was now in the hands of resistance cells on 6 continents. In a university basement in what had been Osaka, Dr. Kenji Miura and 11 of his graduate students were taking apart a Cathari drone they'd brought down with an electromagnetic pulse built from scavenged phone components. They worked in 12-hour shifts. They ate whatever they could find. They did not stop. "The power coupling here," said Miura's student, a 23-year-old named Hana, pointing at a crystalline component with a pair of pliers. "If I'm reading this right, the whole propulsion matrix runs through this one node." Miura peered at it, then he looked at Hana, then he smiled for the first time in a week. "Then let's figure out how to say hello through it," he said. Meanwhile, Cathari medical officers were filing increasingly bewildering reports. Human soldiers captured in field engagements were showing injuries that should have been incapacitating. 3 broken bones, severe burns across 40% of the body, a shrapnel wound that had missed a major artery by millimeters. These humans were still fighting. One captive, a woman who had taken 2 Cathari stun blasts at full power, which would have rendered any other known species unconscious for 30 hours, had been awake and attempting to escape within 6 hours of capture. The medical officer's report concluded with a line that got quietly flagged by 3 different Cathari intelligence analysts. "This species does not appear to have a biological off-switch for aggression when injured. The more damage they sustain, the more unpredictable they become. Recommend immediate escalation of command priority assessment." Vithos read the report, set it down, picked it up again. Somewhere far below him, on the surface of the planet he had come to simply take, 8 billion human beings were improvising, adapting, learning, and absolutely refusing to lie down. He found, to his considerable irritation, that he was beginning to respect them. He found, to his greater irritation, that he was beginning to be afraid. On the 31st day of the occupation, every surviving head of state on Earth received the same encrypted message at the same moment. It contained 4 words: "The bunker, now please." The please was unusual. In the history of emergency summits, please was rarely included. It had been added by Dr. Amara Osai, former UN Special Envoy, current de facto coordinator of Earth's fragmented resistance networks, who believed even now, even in this, that courtesy mattered. That it said something about who you were, especially when everything was on fire. They came. Some traveled in armored vehicles. some in fishing boats along coastlines the Cathari hadn't fully secured. The president of what remained of France was smuggled in a grain truck. The delegate from the Pacific Coalition arrived via submarine. They gathered in the bunker beneath the Andes, 112 representatives of a species that had spent most of its history trying to destroy itself, and was now, perhaps for the first time, confronting something external enough to make all of that feel genuinely petty. Osai stood at the head of the table. She was 53 years old, had gray in her hair and burned scars on her left forearm from the evacuation of Nairobi, and she spoke without notes. "We have been fighting each other for 10,000 years," she said. "We are very good at it. We know each other's weaknesses. We know exactly how to hurt each other. We have spent millennia perfecting the art." She paused. "It is time we turned that talent outward." She placed a single document on the table. The Omega Accord, 12 pages. Every nation's military, every weapons program, every intelligence apparatus, every defense budget unified under a single planetary command structure, effective immediately, with a joint council of oversight and a unified chain of command that answered to no single government, but to Earth itself as an entity. "This has never been done," said the Russian delegate. "A lot of things we're doing haven't been done," Osei said. "We'll lose sovereignty." "We've already lost cities," said the Indian Prime Minister quietly. That ended that line of argument. The debate lasted 9 hours. Some of it was fierce. Some of it was tearful. There was a 40-minute period where 3 delegations were simultaneously threatening to walk out, and another delegation was simultaneously offering to share intelligence files that would have started wars 10 years ago. Osei let it all happen, let everyone say what they needed to say, and then, when the room was exhausted, she put a pen on the table. "We sign this," she said, "or we die separately. Those are the options." At 3:17 a.m., the last signature was added. 112 nations. 72 hours from first contact to a unified planetary government. The Cathari intelligence team monitoring Earth's communications caught the signing ceremony on a tapped broadcast channel. The analyst on duty that night, a methodical, decorated officer named Sarath Vel, watched the footage 3 times. Then she opened a priority channel to Warlord Vithos. "Commander," she said carefully, "I have reviewed the transmission. The humans have just dissolved 10,000 years of political fragmentation in 3 days." Vithos stared at her. "That's not possible," he said. "I know," said Sarath Vel. "Sir, I think we need to talk about our exit strategy." Vithos closed the channel. He sat alone in his command chamber for a long time, looking at nothing, feeling something he had not felt in 30 years of conquest. He felt the cold, specific weight of a mistake he could not take back. General Marcus Webb had a whiteboard in the command center. It was low-tech by design, no network connection, no digital signature, nothing the Cathari could intercept. On it, in increasingly dense notation, he kept what he called the book. The book was everything humanity had learned about fighting the Cathari in 60 days of brutal, grinding resistance. Every engagement, every loss, every unexpected survival, every pattern. The whiteboard had been erased and rewritten 11 times. The 11th version covered all 4 walls of the room and part of the ceiling. "They don't adapt mid-battle," said Captain Torres, pointing at a cluster of notation near the window. She was 29, former Special Forces, had been in 4 engagements, and survived all of them by doing something the enemy hadn't anticipated each time. Once they commit to a tactical pattern in a given engagement, they hold it. They expect the other side to break. They've never had to change plans mid-fight because everyone else always breaks first. Webb nodded slowly, "And we don't break." "We bend," Torres corrected. "We bend and then we come back from a different angle." It was the central insight that was reshaping humanity's entire military doctrine in real time. The Cathari were experienced, well-equipped, and tactically disciplined, But their discipline was the discipline of a species that had never fought anyone who survived long enough to teach them anything new. Their manual of war hadn't been updated in 4 centuries because it hadn't needed to be. Humanity's manual of war was being written fresh every 48 hours. Human soldiers began fighting in ways that baffled Cathari commanders. They used weather, actual weather, rain and mud and heat, as tactical weapons, choosing engagement times and locations based on environmental factors the Cathari hadn't modeled. They attacked supply lines instead of defended positions, which was considered dishonorable in Cathari military tradition, a tradition the humans had absolutely no awareness of and would have ignored anyway. They feigned retreat and then turned and attacked the pursuit. They feigned defeat and left traps. They surrendered small positions to draw forces into ambushes. Most unsettling of all, they learned from every single engagement, wins and losses alike. And they shared that learning across the entire planetary network within hours. The Cathari were fighting one army. Humanity was functioning as a single, learning organism. Then there were the prisoners. 3 Cathari soldiers had been captured intact in a raid outside Buenos Aires. They expected execution, or at minimum harsh interrogation. What they got was food, medical attention, and Dr. Priya Anand, a xenobiologist and linguist from Pune who had been working on the Cathari language for 6 weeks straight and was quite pleased to have live subjects to practice on. She was relentlessly, bafflingly pleasant. She asked them questions about their families. She expressed what appeared to be genuine interest in Cathari cultural practices. She showed them photographs of Earth's wildlife and seemed delighted by their reactions. She explained human history to them, all of it, including the wars, the atrocities, the genocides, with the calm, clear-eyed tone of someone who has made peace with difficult truths and emerged from that peace stronger rather than weaker. The eldest prisoner, a veteran soldier named Care, eventually asked her, "Why are you kind to us? We bombed your cities." Anand considered the question seriously, as she considered all questions. "Because you're people," she said simply, "and also because I want to understand you and people talk more when they're not terrified. And also," she added, "because cruelty would make us smaller and we're going to need to be very large for what comes next." Care thought about this for a long time. Then he told her everything he knew about Cathari ship construction, fleet disposition, and the political structure of the Galactic Coalition. Not because he was broken, not because he was tortured, because somewhere in that conversation he had made a private decision that the humans deserved to win. He was not the only prisoner to reach that conclusion. The breakthrough happened at 2:11 a.m. in a converted aircraft hangar outside Reykjavik, and the person who made it was so tired she didn't initially realize what she'd done. Dr. Sophia Reyes had been awake for 31 hours. She was 36 years old, had a doctorate in theoretical physics and another in applied engineering, and she had spent the last 4 months staring at the captured Cathari drive core on the workbench in front of her like it was a locked box she desperately needed to open. The drive core was the key to everything: faster-than-light travel, the ability to take the fight off Earth, the ability to stop being the prey and start being something else entirely. The Cathari had developed FTL over 6 centuries. The science required was, by the Coalition's general assessment, beyond any civilization less than 300 years into spaceflight. Humanity had been in space for roughly a century. Nobody had told Sophia Reyes this was impossible, and even if they had at 2:11 a.m. after 31 hours awake and 4 months of obsessive study, she wouldn't have been in a state to care. "Oh," she said quietly to nobody. She stared at the equation she'd just written on her notepad. "Oh, that's just," she sat up straight. "That's elegant. That's genuinely elegant. They overcomplicated the entire middle section. You don't need the stabilization array if you," she was already writing faster. If you invert the field relationship here, the geometry solves itself, and then she woke her team, all 11 of them, at 2:15 a.m. Nobody complained. They looked at her face and knew. 3 weeks later, the Prometheus initiative had a working prototype drive. Not elegant, not beautiful, held together with components that would have made a Cathari engineer weep. But it worked. The test drone disappeared from the hangar at 0.3% the speed of light, jumped, and reappeared 30,000 kilometers away, exactly where the calculations said it would. Sophia Reyes sat on the hangar floor and laughed until she cried. The Galactic Coalition's intelligence services detected the test. The energy signature was unmistakable. There was an emergency session of the Coalition's monitoring committee. The session was classified at the highest level, but its general mood can be summarized by a single question that the Coalition's science advisor asked, and that nobody could answer satisfactorily. How? They've been in space for 100 years. We have civilizations that have been spacefaring for 2,000 years that still haven't cracked FTL. How? A delegation was dispatched to Earth immediately to demand answers and to assess the situation firsthand. The delegation's ship dropped out of FTL above Earth and transmitted a formal hailing signal. There was a pause of approximately 40 seconds. Then a calm human voice responded in near-perfect Coalition standard, which it had apparently learned from the captured Cathari prisoners. Please identify your intentions. You have entered contested space. The delegation's ambassador stared at his communications officer. Contested, he said. They're calling their own planet contested space. Sir, said his tactical officer, his voice carrying a new and uncomfortable quality, I'm reading 17 new energy signatures in orbit. They're not Cathari. They're human-built. Sir, they've built warships. A long silence filled the bridge. How many? Said the ambassador quietly. 17 confirmed. I think there are more behind the moon. The delegation did not return to the Coalition. Their ship was politely but firmly guided to a landing site in New Zealand, where they were met by Dr. Osei, who offered them tea and a conversation that lasted 6 hours and left all 3 delegates visibly shaken. What she told them has never been officially recorded. What is known is that they transmitted one message to Coalition Command before their communications were gently, very gently, blocked. The message read, "They're ready." The human fleet dropped out of FTL at 600 hours, Cathari Standard Time, directly inside the defensive perimeter of the Cathari home system. Not outside it, inside it. The positioning alone sent the Cathari High Command into a momentary, undignified chaos. Their early warning systems were designed to detect incoming vessels at the perimeter and engage them at range. Nobody had anticipated an enemy that could calculate a jump accurate enough to materialize already inside the kill zone, because nobody had ever needed to consider it. It had never been done. It had never been done because no one had been desperate, creative, or furious enough to attempt it. The human fleet numbered 31 ships, against the Cathari home fleet of 240. By every rational military calculus, what followed should have lasted approximately 20 minutes and ended with 31 burning hulks drifting in the outer system. It lasted 9 hours. The human ships moved in ways that defied standard fleet doctrine, not because the commanders were brilliant tacticians, though several were, but because they had thrown away the rule book entirely and were improvising at a speed the Cathari couldn't match. They used their smaller size as an advantage, darting between the larger Cathari dreadnoughts at ranges so close that the Cathari couldn't fire without risk of hitting their own ships. They targeted not weapon systems but power distribution nodes, a vulnerability Dr. Mura's team had identified in that Osaka basement 2 years earlier. 3 Cathari dreadnoughts went dark in the first hour, not destroyed, just blinded and paralyzed, drifting helplessly while the battle raged around them. The human crews took losses, terrible losses. 5 ships were destroyed in the first 2 hours, 2 more in the third. The surviving crews watched their comrades die on tactical screens and kept moving, kept firing, kept adapting. On the bridge of the EFS Relentless, Commander Torres, promoted twice in 18 months, scar tissue on her hands from an engagement she didn't talk about, watched a Cathari cruiser swing around toward her damaged frigate. The Relentless had lost its port engine array, its secondary shielding, and a third of its crew. By protocol, it should have retreated. Torres looked at the damage report, looked at the tactical display, looked at the Cathari cruiser trying to line up a killing shot. "Helm," she said, "put us between that cruiser and the Meridian." "Commander, we're between it and the Meridian, now." The Relentless, a ship that should not, by any physical reckoning, have still been flying, moved into the line of fire. The Cathari cruiser hesitated, recalculating its firing solution. In that hesitation, the EFS Meridian swung around and put 3 rounds through the cruiser's exposed engine housing. The Cathari Supreme Commander, Grand Admiral Tethsavar, watched the battle from his flagship with an expression his staff had never seen on his face before. He was a decorated officer of 40 years' service, a veteran of 11 campaigns, conqueror of 9 worlds. He was watching a species that should have been a footnote fight his fleet to a standstill with 31 ships, and he was watching them do it by sheer, unreasonable, incomprehensible refusal to accept that they were losing. When he tried to order a retreat in the 7th hour, he found his escape corridor blocked by a single human frigate, half the size of his flagship, visibly, catastrophically damaged, running on what his tactical officer described as, "Honestly, it's unclear, sir. Our sensors can't identify the power source. I think they may have jury-rigged something." He stared at it for a long time. "Open a channel," he said. The channel opened. On the screen appeared a human woman, young, dark-eyed, calm in the specific way of someone who has moved beyond fear into something on the other side of it. "Admiral," she said. "You are one ship," said Tethsavar. "You are damaged beyond combat effectiveness. Your fleet is suffering severe casualties. Stand aside." Torres looked at him for a moment. "No," she said. Tethsavar closed the channel, sat in silence, then spoke the words that would be repeated, analyzed, debated, and whispered across the coalition for the next century. "What," he said quietly to no one in particular, "are these things?" In the 9th hour, the Cathari fleet, 240 ships against 24 surviving human vessels, surrendered. The coalition emergency session convened in what was ostensibly a neutral location, a massive ring station orbiting a dim star in the middle reaches of the galaxy, equidistant from most major civilizations, chosen specifically because it was nobody's home ground. It was also, as of 72 hours prior, within range of the human fleet's FTL jump capability. Everyone in the chamber understood this. Nobody said it aloud. 137 member species of the Galactic Coalition filled the tiered gallery, from enormous gaseous beings contained in pressurized suits to creatures so small they appeared only as voices from translation, units the size of dice. They had come expecting a confrontation. They had come hopping in the way that comfortable civilizations hope that this could be managed. Dr. Amara Os walked to the speaking floor alone. She wore no military uniform. She had declined the offer of an honor guard. She carried no weapon. She was 55 years old and had been awake for most of the last 3 years, and it showed in the lines of her face and the gray in her hair, and the very particular stillness of someone who has passed through the worst and come out carrying it rather than being crushed by it. The chamber was silent. She did not raise her voice. She had learned long ago that quiet carried further than shouting. "My name is Dr. Amara Osai. I represent Earth. I represent 8 billion people, of whom 612,000 are dead as a direct result of an unprovoked attack on our world. I want you to remember that number, 612,000. I will be saying it again." She paused. The silence was absolute. "I am not here to negotiate. I want to be very clear about that, because I know that some of you came expecting negotiation, and I don't want anyone to be confused about what this conversation is." She looked slowly around the gallery. "I am here to deliver terms." She listed them, one by one, quietly, without drama. Full reparations for every city struck. Complete withdrawal of all coalition military assets from human space within 90 standard days. A binding, non-optional, coalition-wide treaty guaranteeing the inviolability of Earth and all human-settled systems in perpetuity. War crime proceedings against Warlord Vithos and his senior commanders, to be conducted by a joint tribunal that would include human judges. And the one that made the gallery murmur, a formal acknowledgement, entered into the coalition's permanent historical record that the Cathari had been the aggressor. Not a diplomatic euphemism, not an incident, an acknowledgement. 612,000 people, she said again. They had names, they had children, they had things they were going to do next week. They are gone because someone looked at our planet and decided we did not matter enough to ask before taking. She let that land. "We have demonstrated," she said, "that we matter." A delegate from the Vreth collective rose. "Ambassador Osei, surely there is room for—" "There is not," said Osei pleasantly. "The reparations figure alone would." "I know what it would do," said Osei. "I calculated it myself. You have 30 standard days." She looked around the room one last time. There was something in her eyes that was not anger and was not triumph and was not grief, exactly, though it contained elements of all three. It was something older than all of those. Something that had been in humanity's eyes since the very first time something tried to extinguish them and failed. "We have been patient," she said. "We buried our dead and we got back up and we built ships from the wreckage of yours and we came here. All of that took us less than 3 years." She paused. "Think carefully about what we might do with 30 more." She left the speaking floor. The chamber erupted. The coalition signed on the 29th day. Not the 30th, the 29th. A detail that did not go unnoticed, and that was interpreted by political analysts across 40 species as a gesture of submission rather than compliance. A deliberate choice to yield one day early, to demonstrate that they were not defiant, merely defeated. The signing ceremony was broadcast on every coalition network. Os watched it in a small room with Webb, Tors, Sophia Reyes, Dr. Annan, Dr. Mura, and a handful of others who had been there from the beginning. They watched in silence. When the final signature was added, nobody cheered. Tors poured something into cups. They drank. That was all. The reconstruction of Earth took 11 years. The reparations funded it almost entirely, cities rebuilt, infrastructure restored, and then in the places where the wounds had been deepest, something unexpected, memorials. Not monuments of victory, memorials of memory. Simple, human scale designed not to glorify but to insist. To say, this happened. These people were real. They were here. The galaxy watched all of this and tried to understand what it had witnessed. Scholars from across the coalition published papers, held conferences, and argued across decades about the nature of humanity. The military analyses were the simplest. A young species with extraordinary adaptability, high pain tolerance, and a capacity for cooperative learning that outpaced any other known civilization. The tactical innovations alone would be studied in military academies for generations. But the sociologists and the philosophers went deeper, and what they found there was stranger and harder to quantify. Every other species in the coalition, when struck by an overwhelming force, had followed one of 3 paths: submission, extinction, or a prolonged resistance that eventually ground down to submission. The calculus was always the same. When the cost of fighting exceeded the probability of winning, rational actors stopped fighting. Humans had apparently never received this calculus, or had received it, understood it perfectly, and decided it was someone else's problem. A Vreth scholar named Alun Sarath spent 7 years studying human history and published what became the most widely read xenological text of the century. Her conclusion, stripped of its academic language, was this: humanity was not special because it was strong or clever or resilient. Many species were those things. Humanity was special because it was the only species in the known galaxy that had ever looked at an enemy that outmatched it in every measurable way, calculated the odds, and decided that the odds were the enemy's problem, not theirs. And then there was Dr. Care, the Cathari prisoner who had spoken to Priya Anand in a Buenos Aires bunker. He had survived the war, testified at the tribunal, and eventually became the first Cathari to formally petition for residency on Earth, which was granted after a bureaucratic process that he described as the most complicated and yet somehow most human thing I have ever experienced. He wrote a short memoir that sold quietly but persistently across 24 systems. Its final paragraph read, "I asked her why she was kind to us. I have spent years thinking about her answer. I think what she meant, what humanity means, when it is being most itself, is that you must be large enough to hold your grief and your fury and your kindness all at once, because the day you let go of any one of them is the day you become something less than what you are. They were kind because they were also furious. They were furious because they also loved. Every species I know keeps these things separate. Humans carry them together. I think that is why no one will ever be foolish enough to touch them again." The new phrase entered coalition diplomatic language without announcement or ceremony. No one decreed it. It simply spread from military briefings to political strategy sessions to the quiet conversations between parents explaining to children why certain systems on certain star charts were marked with a particular symbol. In the original Cathari, it was 4 syllables with no clean translation. In human English, which became the language of record for the phrase because it had originated there, in that bunker, in those burned cities, in that absurd, improbable survival, it was rendered as 7 words. Don't wake them up again. For 100 years, nobody did.